Exposing the conflict children could not escape. A legal compromise through the lens of Lewis Hine by Alyssa Atson
and Jayla Longenecker. Photography Can Light Up Darkness and Expose Ignorance by Lewis Hine. During the 19th century, child labor was necessary in order to be economically successful. Today, we see child labor as cruel and harmful, but back then, it was how many children spent every day. Many business owners were only focused on making a profit, and child labor helped that happen. It increased production because children were paid less so they could hire more workers. Children couldn't just slack or not show up because they would be punished. A common punishment was called waiting, which caused severe neck and back injuries. A heavy weight was tied to the child's neck and they would have to walk around their work facility. Other children would see the child in pain and work harder, so they would not have to endure the same punishment.
Not all people thought child labor was acceptable. They saw it as a major conflict that needed to be solved. In 1833, the government wanted to improve the conditions that children worked under. They passed the Factory Act, which stated that no child under the age of 9 could work. Employers must have an age certificate for their child workers. Ages 9 to 13 could only work a maximum of 9 hours. Ages 13 to 18 could work up to 12 hours. Children were not allowed to work at night, and each child must go to school for 2 hours every day. 4 factory inspectors were appointed to enforce this law. Unfortunately, employers found ways around this, such as making their own age certificates for the children so they could work more.
One of the people that thought child labor was unacceptable was Louis Wickus Hine. He was born on September 26, 1874, in Oshkosh, Wisconsin. His mother, Sarah Hayes Hine, was an educator, and his father, Douglas Hull Hine, was a veteran from the Civil War and died when Hine was 18.
When Hine was a child, people knew he had a bright future. For example, when his father died, Hine had to support his family financially, meaning he had to start working long hours. He worked in a furniture upholstery factory 13 hours a day, 6 days a week, and earned $4 per week. While working, he experienced child labor firsthand and was determined to fight for children's safety.
Louis Hine received an education from the University of Chicago, Columbia University, and New York University. He studied sociology and became an American sociologist who used his camera as a tool for social reform. While going through college, he attended university extension courses to increase his education. He learned from John Dewey and Ella Flagg Young, who were 2 of the greatest liberal educators at the time. In 1901, Hine met Frankie Manny, who was a big inspiration to him.
Manny became superintendent of the Ethical Culture School in New York later in 1901. Right away, Hine was asked to work at the school to study nature and help teach geography. He also was asked to take pictures of the social and academic activities in the school. There, he experienced the power of photography. Manny encouraged Hine to become an educator, which eventually he did.
In 1904, he photographed immigrants coming into Ellis Island from other countries. He said he was trying to portray them with the same glory as the Pilgrims. During his time there, he discovered that he had a strong passion for photojournalism. Then, in 1906, Hine became a photographer for the Russell Sage Foundation. The purpose of this foundation was to improve social and living conditions.
In 1870, there were 750,000 American children under the age of 15 working. In 1911, there were over 2 million children under the age of 19 working. Child labor was growing rapidly, and the amount of children with health problems, such as stunted growth, being underweight, or having curvature of the spine, was growing as the abuse went on. Since children were smaller, employers used that to their advantage, and they would have them get between machines or put their hands in small spaces to clean. This often resulted in broken bones or cuts. By 1899, 28 states in the U.S. had laws concerning child labor. Although many attempts were made to pass a national law, such as in 1918 and 1922, they were ruled unconstitutional.
The National Child Labor Committee was organized by citizens in 1904 and immediately began their mission to gain rights, awareness, dignity, well-being, and education for the children. The 15 leaders of the NCLC were major parts in social welfare at the time. The committee was not only the largest and most important national child welfare society, but also one of the main 20th century social welfare organizations. They hired investigators to gather evidence of children working in harsh conditions. Other people who were part of the committee studied existing laws regarding child labor. The committee agreed that none of the laws were achieving even the minimum amount of protection the children needed. It was at that point that the NCLC became an organization to fight for better legislation for child labor.
When Hine became a photographer for the National Child Labor Committee in 1908, he became one of the many investigators who organized exhibitions with photos and statistics to dramatize the dangers of the children. These exhibitions were brought to the public's attention, and protests occurred, causing more opposition between the activists and the government. While working for the NCLC, Hine traveled over 50,000 miles in the U.S., from as far west as Chicago and as far south as Florida. Constantly risking his life, he disguised himself in any way possible to get into shops, such as saying he was a Bible salesman taking pictures of children reading Bibles, or an industrial photographer taking pictures of machines. When he gained access into the factory and took pictures, he wrote down the children's age, job description, and any extra information he could get quickly. He wore a suit and coat, which would help him measure the height of the children by the buttons. If he couldn't get in, he would wait outside the building and take pictures of the children leaving. He would distribute the photographs any way he could. Hine said, "If I could tell the story in words, I wouldn't need to lug around a camera."
In 1924, Congress proposed an amendment prohibiting child labor, but the states did not give consent to it. The work of Hine and other people like him brought about a compromise to improve the safety of children in the United States. In 1938, the Fair Labor Standards Act was passed. This required employees to be at least 16 to work during school hours, 18 for dangerous work such as coal mining, and 14 for certain jobs after school hours.
His photography accomplishments also included going to Europe for the American Red Cross in 1917. In Europe, he took pictures of Red Cross workers with refugees and documented information about what they were doing. He also captured the victims and their struggles from World War I. In 1930, he was hired to photograph the building and construction of the Empire State Building. He went to the extreme and hung upside down from a crane to capture the moments he wanted to show.
Then, in 1933, he photographed the American relief efforts during the Great Depression. He worked with several groups such as the TVA and Red Cross. The TVA, or the Tennessee Valley Authority, is a federally owned corporation in the United States created on May 18, 1933, to provide navigation, flood control, electricity generation, fertilizer manufacturing, and economic development to the Tennessee Valley, which was a region particularly affected by the Great Depression. Lastly, in 1936, Hine was chosen as the chief photographer for the National Research Project of the WPA. Unfortunately, his work was never finished there and he died in 1940.
If Lewis Hine hadn't risked his life to help the children, it would have taken longer for people to realize the horrific conditions children were working under. The children would have continued to have a childhood with little hope of improvement. His work brought on a compromise that enabled children to go to school and have a successful life.